What is up? This is your LA in a minute, and June 3rd is an important and dark day in Los Angeles history, as that date in 1943 marks the beginning of the infamous Zoot Suit Riots. Let's get into what that was and why it was significant. The Zoot Suit Riots were a series of street fights between groups of U.S. servicemen and zoot suit wearing young Latinos, mostly Mexican, that took place from June 3rd to June 8th, 1943. Racism on both sides was reaching a fever pitch. In the 1930s, the government mandated a Mexican repatriation mass deportation, which resulted in a deportation of 20% of all Mexicans from California. When the U.S. entered World War II, they reversed course real quick, negotiating the Bracero program, which enabled millions of Mexicans to come back to California and Los Angeles, which further angered many white servicemen and Americans. By 1943, tensions between the thousands of white U.S. servicemen stationed in and around the city and the zoot suit-wearing Latinos were running high. Although nearly 500,000 Mexican Americans were serving in the military at the time, many of the L.A. area servicemen viewed the zoot suiters, most of whom were too young to be eligible, as World War II draft dodgers. So where do zoot suits fit in? First popularized in the 1930s in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City, the flamboyant zoot suit had taken on racist overtones by the early 1940s. In LA, zoot suit-wearing Latino youths calling themselves Pachucos and Pachucas as a reference to their rebellion against traditional American culture were increasingly viewed by white residents as menacing juvenile delinquent thugs. The zoot suits themselves fueled the violence. After entering World War II, the United States began a ration, including the manufacture of wool, which was heavily used in the zoot suits. Despite the rationing, there were bootleg tailors in LA who continued to turn out the wool suits, and that again inflamed white Americans. Backing up to August of 1942, 23-year-old Mexican Jose Diaz was found beaten to death in a reservoir known as Sleepy Lagoon in East LA. After a brief and insufficient investigation, the LAPD rounded up 17 members of the 38th Street Gang, arrested them, put them on trial, where most of them ended up convicted of life in jail. On the evening of June 3rd, 1943, a group of U.S. sailors told police that they had been attacked by a gang of zoot suit-wearing Mexicans in downtown L.A. The next day, 200 uniformed sailors seeking revenge took taxis and buses to the East L.A. and attacked dozens of zoot suit-wearing Pachucos, beating them and stripping them of their clothing. News coverage did not help as newspapers continued to inflame tensions. The violence was outrageous, but the police arrested 600 Mexicans and very few servicemen. Finally, on June 9th, military personnel were dispatched to help the LAPD maintain order, but the city council passed an emergency resolution making zoot suits illegal. A week later, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a newspaper column that said racism is a problem that we should face head on. 79 years later, even here in Los Angeles, the Zoot Suit Riots show us that there are wounds that need to be explored and understood. All right, LA, it's been a minute.